Hello and welcome to this next installment of Getting Started with notebookSnap. Today we're going to create a more detailed project. This is used for capturing metadata within SQL Server. What we'll do is use a notebook, and the notebook has a series of about 10 steps. And then what we'll do is ingest that into the database. And so now the notebook code cells will be in the database, and this will include a data flow as well as transformations. And in fact, it's building a little data mart, which is a model that can be used really to populate a data warehouse. And I'll also show you how to use a custom project cell table to allow you to run in parallel and start to use additional features beyond the first project that we had, which was maintaining log files or log file deletes. Let's go ahead and look at the project. It is right here, metadata refresh for SQL Server. Now this can be downloaded from GitHub. If you need to get directions for that, just watch our earlier video. And you will get this particular notebook, and you'll see it's metadata refresh for SQL Server. Now there's two of them. The first one is the actual project. The second one is just a way to help you to set up this project. So the first thing I'd like to point out is within this project, we're now introducing the concept of a parameter. And you can see the syntax for the parameter is the $ with the open and close braces. But notice it's all commented out, it's all in green. And then the actual value that will be used. So I can go ahead and run this particular first step. And again, there's going to be about 10 steps. First, I have to choose a connection. This will run off of the ELT-SNAP database. And so I'll go ahead and click the run cell. So it's perfectly runnable. But what will happen when we ingest it, it'll say, oh, I see that there is a parameter, meaning that you're able to assign this value for any, in this case, it's an environment, a server name that you're collecting metadata from. And we call it dev, but you could give it any server name. And by doing so, you can collect metadata from multiple servers. Now remember from the last installment, what we talked about was metadata that we use to further explain how we're going to run this, because at runtime we need to know, well, what connection do we run this against? And then is this a data flow, extract and load, or is this a transformation? So I'm going to hit F1 and go into my notebook cell metadata, and we can see this is an execute SQL. We're going to give it this name. So this is the name of the cell, which will become the name of the package when we ingest it into ELT-SNAP. And here we can give it the name of the connection. So it will run automatically with this connection. All connections, by the way, are also parameterized by design, and you can always provide a new server name, database name, etc. Okay, so that's the first step. The second step is going to truncate these staging tables. That's again an execute SQL. But notice this one. It is, of course, parameter driven using the very same parameter name. And the design on this is to retrieve all databases. Well, when we run this, we're going to populate DIM database. But here as a notebook, it won't actually create a data flow short of running the select query and returning it to Azure Data Studio, right? But it's okay for the eyeballs to see how it's working, and we can go ahead and run it and see that it will return these, but it's not actually going anywhere except into the notebook. What we'd like for it to do is to go into this table that we just truncated. That's the staging table. So the metadata for this one is for a data flow. I'll hit F1 and we'll look at the cell metadata. And now you can see that this is a data flow, meaning it's actually going to move data from source to destination. The source is going to be the SQL Server connection. I'll describe that in just a little bit. The destination is ELT-SNAP v2. This is metadata, or names of tables and columns and databases on the source server moving into the staging database. And it'll populate this particular table. So on this connection, destination connection, in the schema table, and you could specify batch size if you want. There's other options with identity insert, etc. But that's good enough for now. All right, and then you can see we're going to go through and run a number of different steps. We'll eventually run some merge statements, and you can see there's actually, I think, 3 data flows, about 4 merge statements, and this will build this little data mart within the ELT-SNAP v2 database. Okay, so how do we get this into the database? Well, what we need to do is ingest it. So right now it's a notebook. We want to ingest it into the database. In order to do that, we have a notebook that will do just that interactively. You could also set it up to run programmatically, but we'll just run this interactively. And what this tells you, it's going to pull from these files. And where are the files? Wherever you choose to place the notebook. So when you clone this from GitHub, it'll ask you, where do you want to place this? Wherever your repository is, you would just want to update this particular variable. If your SQL Server instance is not available or accessible with localhost, you can put in the name, and of course ELT-SNAP v2 database. And then it just invokes a couple of PowerShell commands to, in this case, it's also going to truncate staging files, and it's going to load all of the files that are in this particular location. First, all the notebook files and all the .sql files, because you can also use those in notebookSnap. So I'll just go ahead and run all, and this will bring all of these files into the database. And so I can take a quick look at the database now, and that's going to go into this table, ADS files. So we'll just take a look at that, and so there they are. And this is the content, or the JSON, that was collected from those notebooks. Okay, so the only other thing we need to do in order to run this is to go to what is really a sister project, which is Metadata Refresh Project Setup. And this is a notebook designed solely to set this particular project up. So we'll take a quick look at this. We want to connect to the same ELT-SNAP database. So let me do that. Notice what it's doing. So I referred to the SQL Server connection beforehand. So because this particular notebook, this data flow is going to pull from your SQL Server, you have to tell it where that SQL Server is. And so it's going to create that connection. And again, you can update these values to point to your SQL Server. And then we have the import option, but also you have an impact check. Now, if you had done this previously, or if you had a more mature database and you say, well, if I import this project, does it affect anything else? Because it could be a shared connection. It could actually be shared packages, shared parameters. So you could actually run this. I won't, because this is a brand new database. So I can jump directly to importing it. And so what we'll do is we'll run the stored procedure. It'll create this particular project, and it'll base it on this notebook that we just walked through. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And now it's all created. I can go into our extension for Azure Data Studio. I'll hit F1, and that's ELT-SNAP Open Forms. And you can see there's the project that we just created. If I click on the connections, you can see we have the first 2. These were created before. We are going to reuse these, but we have this new connection, which is called SQL Server. And you can edit this as well if you need to. You can look at all the packages. So here's all the packages for Metadata Refresh. You can see what it's done. It's numbered them sequentially. So you have your execute SQLs, your data flow. So this is your transformation, your extract and load, ELT, EL, TTT, etc. And to run this, you can run an individual package. I'm going to run a project. So I'll click on projects, and then I'll go ahead and click on run. And so now I can choose a different environment, and I can, of course, choose a different template. We'll talk more about that in a later segment. But I'm just going to click on Run. And you can see that it copied this to the clipboard and it pasted it into the terminal window. So it's going to start up the runtime. It's going to run the definition of this project, Metadata Refresh v2, that is in this database using framework logging, which is the standard template. So all I have to do is hit enter and it'll take off. So it'll show you what the values of the connections are, and it'll run this sequentially. Now, while that's running, let's go back to this notebook, because you have another option. That other option, you can use a table that's called Project Cells Table. In other words, you can customize where to pull which code cell. And this is where you will also, in the next segment, we'll show you how to mix PowerShell with SQL. But in this case, the reason I would do this is we can give the run order, those processes that can run in parallel, instead of running strictly sequentially, which is what you'd pick up within the notebook. So these two would run in parallel, and these two in parallel, and these two in parallel. So you would do that by populating this table. There's other ways to populate this table besides the insert statement. This is just a handy way to do this. And in a subsequent video, so this one doesn't get too long, we'll show you how to run that particular extension module to put these in sequence and in fact run in parallel. So now we should be done. We'll just double check. And okay, it's still going, giving you the row counts. This is part of the framework. You can go into the framework database, that's ELT framework, and it'll give you the numbers. Okay, now it is actually finished. So that is our second installment on getting started with ELT Snap. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next installment.